The disappearance of 14-year-old Georgina Kruger in September 2006 shook the quiet Berlin district of Moabit. This case, which remained unsolved for over a decade, demonstrated how a carefully planned police investigation can expose even the most cautious criminal. Georgina lived with her mother, younger sister Michelle, and grandmother after her parents divorced several years ago. Her older brother Tommy, who was 22 at the time, lived separately. The girl was tall, slender, with a bright appearance. She loved wearing fashionable clothes, used makeup, and looked older than her age. She dreamed of a career as a model or actress, so she seriously engaged in dance, singing, and acting. At her new school, Georgina faced the standard problems after moving. Her appearance caused a real stir among the boys, which her female classmates strongly disliked. The girls kept their distance, openly envying the attention she received from the opposite sex. On September 22, 2006, an opportunity arose for Georgina to get closer to her dream. She successfully passed an audition for a small role in the TV series, Turkish for Beginners. The producers were supposed to call her on Monday, September 25, with the final decision regarding her participation in the filming. The girl spent the entire weekend in joyful anticipation. On Monday, Georgina was at school for classes as usual. After classes, around 2 p.m., she boarded bus number 27 to go home. She had to ride a few stops and then walk about a kilometer. According to eyewitnesses, the girl was last seen getting off the bus. At home, her grandmother and younger sister were waiting for her. They had prepared lunch and planned to spend the day together. When Georgina did not arrive on time, her grandmother tried to call her cell phone, but all calls were redirected to voicemail. The worried woman contacted the school, where they confirmed that the girl was in class and left after it ended. When Georgina's mother returned from work and learned about her daughter's disappearance, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Such behavior was completely uncharacteristic for the girl. She was always punctual and kept her commitments. It seemed especially suspicious that her phone was turned off on the very day she was expecting an important call from the studio. The police began the investigation by checking the most obvious versions. Could the girl have run away from home due to a conflict? But all her things remained in place. She had no money for an escape. Perhaps there was some fight with friends or classmates. However, questioning revealed no serious conflicts. With the help of footage from surveillance cameras, it was established that Georgina had indeed exited the bus at her stop. Unfortunately, tracking her further route was impossible due to the lack of cameras on the way to her house. Analysis of mobile communication data showed that at 2:06 p.m., the girl's phone was located 200 meters from her house, after which it suddenly turned off. A large-scale search operation began. The police thoroughly searched all the basements and attics in the area, involved dog handlers with service dogs. They questioned all the local residents who could have seen the schoolgirl or noticed something suspicious. They checked several dozen previously convicted persons who lived in the area, especially those who had a propensity for crimes of a sexual nature. But all the suspects had a reliable alibi. Leaflets and posters with a photo and description of the missing girl appeared on the streets. The family actively helped in the search, but it was all in vain. The only thing that could be established for sure was that the girl disappeared just 200 meters from her home. This event shook the entire district. Local residents were frightened and afraid to let their children out of sight. It was especially hard for Georgina's younger sister Michelle. Her carefree childhood ended on the day her sister disappeared. Her mother and grandmother no longer allowed her to walk alone. They personally accompanied her to and from school. Years passed, but the investigation did not progress. 3 years after the disappearance, another search operation was carried out using dogs trained to search for human remains. By that time, few people, except for relatives, hoped to find Georgina alive. Only the mother continued to believe that her daughter had simply run away and would someday return home. The breakthrough in the investigation came with the events of 2016, 10 years after the girl's disappearance. During a re-questioning of local residents, several neighbors spoke about a suspicious man who lived nearby. It was 30-year-old unemployed Ollie K., who often watched teenagers and tried to communicate with schoolgirls while standing near his apartment building. At first glance, Ollie seemed like an ordinary family man. He was married, had 3 children, and tried to create the image of an exemplary father. He was born in Berlin into a Turkish family. After school, he worked as a janitor and an assistant at a construction site. In 2002, he obtained German citizenship. At the time of Georgina's disappearance, he was unemployed, making ends meet with odd jobs and social assistance. He had numerous debts due to his passion for gambling. The investigators' attention was particularly drawn to an incident in 2011. Back then, Ollie lured a 17-year-old neighbor into the basement by offering to sell her a cell phone at a low price. In the basement, he confessed his feelings to her and tried to kiss her, and when the girl began to resist, he hit her on the head and raped her. For this crime, in 2012, he received only a year and a half of probation. At the trial, Ollie claimed that the girl herself had offered him intimate relations instead of payment for the phone, and his family fully supported dispersion. The investigators decided to develop a complex operation to infiltrate agents into the suspect's environment. The first agent, under the pseudonym Hakan, was supposed to pose as a successful businessman who had moved to Berlin and was going to open a car wash. He managed to meet Ollie in a cafe where he usually spent time and offered him a job as a manager at the future car wash. Gradually, Hakan and Ollie became inseparable friends, traveling together on business trips, which made it possible to establish a trusting relationship. The second agent was a woman under the pseudonym Susie, who was supposed to get close to Ollie's family, especially his wife Maniac. The couples began spending time together. Ollie's family even trusted the agents to look after their children, which allowed them to calmly inspect his property, but no direct evidence was found. Then it was decided to introduce a third agent under the pseudonym Kara, who was supposedly Hakan's cousin with a criminal past. Ollie quickly found a common language with Kara and began to show his true colors. They visited brothels together, where Ollie regularly cheated on his wife, and Kara paid for all the entertainment, explaining it by the presence of illegal income. In 2018, the investigators decided to use an unexpected twist, an anonymous call to the police from a person who allegedly knew where Georgina's body was located. Although nothing was found at the specified coordinates, this incident was used to put pressure on the suspect. Kara offered Ollie €150,000 for killing a girl who was supposedly blackmailing him. Tempted by the large sum, which could solve all his financial problems, Ollie agreed and began actively planning the crime. During one of the car trips, a candid conversation took place between Kara and Ollie, which was recorded. To prove his ability to kill, Ollie unexpectedly told the story about Georgina Kruger. He confessed that he watched her every day when the girl was returning from school and was fascinated by her beauty. On September 25, 2006, he asked her to help carry things to the basement, offering to pay her. When the trusting girl found herself in the basement, Ollie hit her on the head. Georgina did not lose consciousness and began to scream. Realizing that the situation was getting out of control, he hit her several more times. Fearing that if she survived and escaped, he would face imprisonment, Ollie strangled his victim with his hands. In his confession, he even mentioned how much his fingers hurt from the strain during the strangulation, a detail that, according to experts, could only be known by the real killer. According to Ollie, Georgina's body remained in the basement for 3 days. All this time, the police and volunteers were searching for the girl all over the area, even searching basements, but for some reason, they did not reach his hiding place. When the search subsided a little, he wrapped the body in garbage bags, then in an old carpet, and threw it into a dumpster. The remains were taken to a waste processing plant, where everything was burned, so they were completely destroyed. In December 2018, 12 years after the girl's disappearance, Ollie K. was arrested. During a search of his home, nothing was found that could directly link him to the crime. During interrogations, he remained silent and refused to give any testimony. It turned out that he had already been interrogated in 2006 as a neighbor, but at that time he denied that he even knew the missing girl and did not arouse suspicion since he had no criminal record yet. The prosecution was based mainly on the confession obtained by the agents and circumstantial evidence. Geolocation of the mobile phone confirmed that on the day of the disappearance, Ali's phone was near Georgina's phone several times, at 1:14 p.m., 2:25 p.m., 2:32 p.m., and 3:13 p.m. Several witnesses spoke about his inappropriate behavior towards underage girls. On July 31, 2019, a trial began that attracted huge public attention. The court was presented with recordings of telephone conversations between Ali's wife, Maniac, which were tapped during the investigation. In conversations with a friend, she expressed serious concern about her husband's behavior, stated that she was afraid for her children, and asked her older son to look after his sisters and not leave them alone with their father. On March 12, 2020, after a lengthy trial, Ali K. was sentenced to life imprisonment. After the verdict was announced, he continued to insist on his innocence and demanded a review of the case. According to his version, the story about Georgina's murder was completely fabricated to gain Kara's trust and prove that he was a suitable candidate for the role of a hired killer. However, the court found his explanations unconvincing, especially considering the precise details of the crime that he described in his confession. All the years after Georgina's disappearance, her family kept the girl's room untouched. Every year on her birthday and Christmas, they bought her gifts, which they left unopened, hoping for her return. The news that their little girl had been brutally murdered practically near her own home was a terrible blow to them. It was especially hard to realize that the killer had lived nearby all this time and continued his usual life. After the verdict was announced, Georgina's mother expressed outrage that a dangerous criminal who had previously attacked minors remained at large for so long and had the opportunity to commit a new crime. If law enforcement agencies had taken previous incidents involving Ali K. more seriously, perhaps the tragedy could have been prevented. The Georgina Kruger case became one of the most high-profile criminal stories in Germany at the beginning of the 21st century. It demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of the German law enforcement system. On the one hand, to solve the crime, a brilliant operation was carried out to introduce undercover agents, which lasted almost 2 years. The detectives showed incredible persistence and professionalism, not stopping the search for the truth even a decade after the girl's disappearance. On the other hand, the case revealed serious shortcomings in the system of control over persons prone to sexual crimes. Ali K. repeatedly demonstrated dangerous behavior towards underage girls but received only suspended sentences. Even after a brutal attack on a 17-year-old girl, he remained at large, which allowed him to continue to pose a threat to those around him. The professional work of the undercover agents played a special role in solving the crime. They were able to create such convincing legends and so skillfully gain the trust of the suspect that he eventually revealed his darkest secret. It is noteworthy that the confession was obtained not under pressure or threats, but in a casual conversation when Ali himself decided to brag about his experience to a person whom he considered an accomplice. An important aspect of the case was the use of modern technologies to gather evidence. Geolocation of mobile phones made it possible to establish that on the day of Georgina's disappearance, the phones of the victim and the killer were near each other at a critical moment. Recordings of the suspects and his wife's telephone conversations provided important information about the nature of their relationship and Maniac's fears about her husband's behavior. This story also showed how important it is not to stop the investigation even in cases where it seems that all possibilities have been exhausted. For 10 years, the case seemed hopeless. There was no body of the victim, no direct evidence of the crime, no reliable witnesses. However, thanks to the persistence of the investigators and the use of non-standard methods of investigation, the killer was still exposed and brought to justice. The tragic fate of Georgina Kruger forced German society to reconsider its attitude towards the safety of children in an urban environment. After this case, many schools strengthened security measures and introduced special training programs for children on the roles of personal safety. Parents began to pay more attention to how their children move around the city, with whom they communicate, what strangers live in the neighborhood. This lesson was especially painful for the Kruger family. Georgina's younger sister, Michelle, lost not only her sister but also her carefree childhood. Constant fear and overprotection from her mother and grandmother affected her development and personality formation. The older brother Tommy, who lived separately, blamed himself for a long time for not being around and not being able to protect his sister. After the trial, Georgina's mother admitted to journalists that the most terrible thing for her was the realization that the killer had lived so close all this time and that she could have met him on the street every day without even suspecting that he was responsible for her daughter's death. She said that for years she had tried to convince herself that Georgina was alive and had simply run away, perhaps to India, which she often dreamed about to become an actress. Reality turned out to be much crueler. The case also had a significant impact on the German legal system. After it gained publicity, a review of legislation on the punishment of sexual crimes against minors was initiated. Many experts and public figures emphasized the need for stricter control over persons who have convictions for such offenses and the inadmissibility of assigning suspended sentences in such cases. Ali K's family, despite all the evidence, continues to insist on his innocence. His wife Maniac, who during the investigation expressed serious concerns about her husband's behavior, suddenly changed her position after the trial and began to claim that it was all a provocation by the police. Ali's 3 children found themselves in a difficult situation. Their father was recognized as a brutal killer, but they continued to believe in his innocence. The investigators who worked on the case later admitted that the operation to infiltrate agents was one of the most difficult in their practice. They had to create such believable legends that they could withstand thorough scrutiny from not only Ali himself but also his relatives and acquaintances. It was especially difficult for the agent Susie, who had to maintain close friendly relations with the suspect's wife for many months. The success of the operation largely depended on the correctly chosen bait, the offer of a high-paying job at a non-existent car wash. Knowing about Ali's financial problems and his passion for the beautiful life, the investigators correctly calculated that he would not be able to resist such an opportunity. This made it possible to establish a trusting relationship with him and gradually lead him to a situation where he himself wanted to boast about his criminal experience. Psychologists who analyzed Ali K's behavior noted the characteristic features of a serial predator. He carefully selected victims, watched them for a long time, used children's trust in adults and his status as a neighbor. His previous attack on a 17-year-old girl demonstrated a similar handwriting, luring into the basement under a plausible pretext. Experts believe that if he had not been stopped, he could have committed new crimes. The Georgina Kruger case became an important lesson for law enforcement agencies and society as a whole. It showed that even the most carefully hidden crimes can be solved thanks to the professionalism of investigators and the use of modern methods of investigation. At the same time, it reminded us of the need for a more attentive attitude to the safety of children and adolescents, especially in an urban environment. The memory of Georgina Kruger lives on not only in the hearts of her loved ones but also in the minds of many people. Her story became a symbol of how important it is not to lose hope for the establishment of truth and the punishment of criminals, even if it takes years of painstaking work. At the same time, it remains a painful reminder of the price that can be paid for a frivolous attitude to the first signs of dangerous behavior of potential criminals. At the place where Georgina was last seen, local residents created an improvised memorial. People bring flowers, candles, and toys to honor the memory of the girl whose life was cut short so early and tragically. Every year on the day of her disappearance, not only relatives and friends gather here but also complete strangers who were deeply affected by this story. For the investigators who worked on solving this crime, the Georgina case became one of the most memorable in their careers. They not only achieved the conviction of the killer but also helped change the system of dealing with such crimes. Now the police take reports of suspicious behavior towards minors much more seriously, and a method of introducing undercover agents, practiced during this operation, is used to solve other complex cases. The story of Georgina Kruger will forever remain in the annals of German criminology as an example that justice can triumph even many years after a crime. At the same time, it serves as a constant reminder of the need to protect the most vulnerable members of society and not leave any signals about a possible threat to their safety unattended. The Georgina Kruger case also raised an important question about the role of the media in investigating such crimes. Throughout all the years after the girl's disappearance, journalists regularly returned to this topic, maintaining public interest and helping the investigation obtain new information from witnesses. At the same time, excessive press attention sometimes complicated the work of the police, especially during the secret operation to introduce agents. The disclosure of this crime became possible thanks to a combination of classical methods of police work with the latest technologies and non-standard approaches to investigation. International cooperation also played an important role. German investigators consulted with colleagues from other countries where similar, cold cases had been successfully solved. Today, the story of Georgina Kruger is studied in police academies as an example of how important it is not to stop the investigation even in the most difficult cases. Her case changed not only the methods of work of law enforcement agencies but also society's attitude to the problem of the safety of children and adolescents. Thanks to this tragic case, many potential victims were saved, because now both the police and citizens pay much more attention to the first signs of dangerous behavior. Every year on Georgina's birthday, her family organizes charity events to support organizations that search for missing children and help victims of violence. Thus, the memory of the girl who dreamed of becoming an actress continues to live on in good deeds that help other children avoid her tragic fate. Georgina Kruger's death became not just another criminal case, it forced German society to rethink its values and priorities. Thanks to this case, legislation on the protection of children was strengthened, new educational safety programs for school children were introduced, and additional mechanisms for monitoring persons who pose a potential threat to minors were created. Georgina's room in her mother's house still remains untouched, as a symbol of unquenchable hope and love, as a reminder that justice, although not always quick, inevitably comes. Her story continues to live in the hearts of people, reminding us of how important it is to protect our children and never give up in the search for truth, no matter how bitter it may be. The tragic story of Georgina Kruger inevitably makes us think about many things. First and foremost, about our children's safety in today's world. Despite all the technical means of control, improvements in law enforcement, and better education, children continue to disappear. They are kidnapped, raped, and murdered by perverts whom we often surround with an aura of respectability. What can we do? How can we protect ourselves? There are no universal solutions. However, some rules are worth learning. For example, never letting children go to unfamiliar places with strangers. Teaching them not to trust overly friendly adults. Not being afraid to call for help if someone makes them do something uncomfortable. Always telling parents where they're going and with whom. And of course, one of the main rules is being vigilant and attentive parents. Taking interest in our children's lives, their friends, and their problems. Not being too lazy to walk them to school one extra time or pick them up from activities. Keeping track of children's movements using gadgets. Maybe it limits a child's personal freedom, but safety is worth it. Unfortunately, even all these measures don't guarantee 100% protection. Because evil is ingenious and insidious. It hides behind the mask of goodness and pretends to be familiar. Until it catches its victim in its clutches. This is where people around us play a significant role. If Ali K's neighbors hadn't stayed silent about his suspicious behavior back in 2006 and had immediately reported it to the police, perhaps Georgina would be alive. So we shouldn't be afraid to stick our nose in other people's business when it comes to children's safety. It's better to be overcautious than to later blame ourselves for staying silent. And so ends this horrifying, sad, and cautionary tale about young Georgina Kruger's death at the hands of a devious serial killer. This tragedy shook all of Germany and made millions of people wonder, are they doing enough to protect their children? Are they too naive and trusting of strangers? Are they ready to protect what's most precious to them? Of course, everyone draws their own conclusions. And there's no universal manual that can guarantee children's protection from evil. Sometimes terrible things happen even with maximum caution and care. Life, no matter how you look at it, is unpredictable. However, Georgina's story itself is a painful reminder that we live in a cruel world. A world where a predator in human form might be lurking near your home, or living next door and greeting you every morning. Therefore, we adults are simply destined to remain vigilant. For the sake of our children's peace and future. Has German society learned any important lessons from this tragedy? We want to believe so. At least after the high-profile trial of Ali K., the German government strengthened penalties for sexual crimes against minors. And that's good. Because even the threat of a life sentence doesn't always stop perverts. But the inevitability of punishment will stop many. Law enforcement and civic organizations have also intensified their public awareness campaign. After all, the more people know how to recognize a pedophile or kidnapper, the harder it will be for them to hunt children. Because under the watchful eye of the community, a criminal will inevitably reveal themselves. So let's not be indifferent. Let's not live by the principle, not my problem, literally, my house is on the edge. Because that's how you might lose your own children. And no one would wish that upon anyone. So let's learn from others' mistakes. Let's pay attention to warning signs. Let's watch those who raise even the slightest suspicion. And most importantly, let's communicate more with our children. Because then we definitely won't miss trouble coming. If each of us changes our attitude even slightly after Georgina Kruger's tragedy, may she rest in peace. And may we all have peaceful skies and a safe future for our children.